Receive our own, the one, the only, legendary, the Honorable Claudia House Morcom. Whoa, thank you. I'm not even running for office. Thank you. I am so excited, and mostly because I'm going to introduce Angela, but because of this wonderful turnout that we have, and I want to thank everybody for coming. I see young people, I see new friends, I see friends of long standing. See, I don't say old friends anymore. I'm too old myself. But this has been just a wonderful showing of what Detroit means and what Detroit thinks, not just of Angela, but for what she stands for. I didn't know who Angela Davis was back in the 60s. I was a new young lawyer trying to make a living, find a job, and had finally gone down to Mississippi. And I want to say this, while I was in Mississippi, I met one of her future attorneys for her trial, Margaret Burnham, had been down there with SNCC, and she was one of host of young people that had been arrested by the Mississippi authorities and was in the jail. And I went to the jail on my first day in Mississippi with Carsey Hall, who was one of the only 3 black lawyers in Mississippi, to talk to the young people who were there. And I think they were in the fairgrounds because so many of them were there, and Margaret was there. And years later, I found out, you know, who she was, and she became such an activist on behalf of Angela and also a judge later, but stopped as a judge so that she could work in the kinds of community events that were going on as an activist. Also, I met Howard Moore, who became one of Angela's attorneys for her trial, and also Leo Branton I had known by reputation for a long, long time. And as many of you know, I think Angela was serving also as her own counsel in the trial that they had in San Jose, but, and she gave the opening statement. Now, Angela is a person that has always been an activist. She's an academician, she is an educated person, she has long been in academia. The President of the United States got her fired, and at that time, that was Ronald Reagan, from her position in the school in California because she was a communist. And one of the things that happened when Angela was arrested on these trumped-up charges and put in jail, I was asked by some people here in Detroit who knew Angela, Tommy Dennis, Wendell Addington, if I would lend my name to her to support her in trying to get the word out about her and the kind of person she was. And they told me so many things about Angela, I couldn't say no. And those of you who are going into the reception later, there's a picture of Angela, Wendell Addington, who was the young man that asked me to work on the committee, Senator Jackie Vaughn. Do any of you remember Jackie? Yeah. And myself, and it's 40 years old. It was taken out at the fairgrounds after Angela was acquitted on her case, and Angela has her afro, but I have an afro. I had never worn an afro in my life, so you can see me in my first and only afro. It was quite a thing. But Jackie Vaughn and I were the chair people of the Free Angela Davis Committee for the state of Michigan and especially Detroit. We worked so hard to get her case out and to get people to know about her and to demonstrate and to be prideful for what she had accomplished and also to work for her defense and to raise money for her attorneys. And everybody came out. It was fantastic. We brought her mother here, Sally Davis, to talk about Angela in the early years and how she had been committed as a young person, even when the friends of hers at the Birmingham church, which was bombed, were killed, 4 young women that Angela and her sister Fania were very, very close to. We brought Reverend Ben Chavis here. This was when the Wilmington 10 had been charged with trumped-up charges also, and worked on his behalf, but he also helped us raise money for Angela. Then when Angela won her trial, it was a phenomenal thing. But Detroit came out and should be complimented on how we handled it. At the fairgrounds, when Angela came to town after the victory, there were 10,000 people who came to the fairgrounds on her behalf. At that time, the black police officers who were called the Guardians, and Tom Moss, I don't know if any of you remember Tom. Tom was the one, they were our security out there at the fairgrounds. And we had to have a bulletproof shield up in front of the microphone where Angela was speaking, because there were still racists who were making threats about her safety, and her security. But Detroit turned out, and that's one of the reasons why this program is called Detroit Welcomes Angela Davis. What we did is we have put into the program itself a little bit about Angela's background, activism. You know the universities that she's taught at and the schools, and she's traveled all over the world. You know that she also speaks several languages, excuse me, French and German, and I think Spanish. Is that true? A little bit, she says. But she's been to Cuba many, many times. She has never forgotten the theme that unless we're united as a community of people, black, white, brown, yellow, we can never really accomplish anything. But once we do unite in that way, we can do anything. And she has in addition to speaking all over the world and teaching at all of the universities, she's one of the organizers and founding members of Critical Resistance, which is dedicated to dismantling the prison industry in the United States. She has worked in Australia, Queensland, Australia, with the Sisters Inside, based on her experiences and her 18 months in prison jails, both in New York and in California, and her trial, which was removed to San Jose, California. This is a woman who has had so many experiences and done it on behalf of the people in her community, not for herself, but for other people. And we can't afford to let the information about her pass over young people. They've got, see, she's one of my heroes. Now, I'm a few years older than Angela, but you never know it, right? But she has been a hero of mine ever since I found out about her and I met her. And I think that there's so many young people now that need to know her story so they can put themselves in the same kind of situation. And it is my privilege and joy right now, ladies and gentlemen, to bring on Angela Davis.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really great to be in Detroit again. And this is the Detroit of Coleman Young. And the Detroit of John Conyers. And of Reverend Anthony and Claudia Morcom and Joanne Watson and the Communist Party and the Democratic Socialists. First of all, let me thank everyone who was involved in organizing this amazing gathering on the eve of the elections. As you've heard, this is the 40th anniversary year of my acquittal. And I cannot believe it has been 40 years. I remember very vividly that meeting at the fairgrounds and the bulletproof shield, which I desperately tried to get them to take down. But anyway, let me take this opportunity to thank everyone here this evening and everyone in the city of Detroit who joined the campaign for my freedom. Thank you. Although I have lived almost continuously in California since that time, I have come to Detroit many times for the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which continued the work of the campaign, attempting to secure the freedom of other political prisoners, challenging racist repression. And I've come under the auspices of the Communist Party. I remember very vividly the rally that took place in the 80s. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it was a rally against the plant shutdowns as global capitalism was leading to the deindustrialization of this city. And I can remember that the slogan was, "Save Dodge, Maine." Does anybody remember that campaign? I don't know whether at that time we would have predicted that capitalism would have so thoroughly penetrated the lives of people all over this planet. When we challenged union-busting practices then, I don't know whether we could have imagined the extent to which the labor movement would sustain such damaging blows over the coming years. We certainly could not have predicted that the prison industrial complex would become such a profit-generating sector of the global economy, and that here in the United States, 25% of the world's incarcerated population would reflect 5% of the world's population at large. The U.S. has become what we now call a prison nation. And this prison nation is fueled by racism, by structural racism. But I don't want to begin by conveying the impression that everything that has happened over the last 30 or 40 years is negative. Because at that time, I don't think any of us could have foreseen the election of a black president in 2008. And of course, this rally takes place on the eve of the elections, in which there is another unprecedented electoral phenomenon. This black president is running for re-election. That is the first time in history that we've experienced such a thing. And we not only want to contribute to the efforts that will guarantee that the other candidate is not elected, but we want to reflect on the issues which we may have to take into our own hands even after we have elected the best candidate. It seems as if we lose the sense of newness and uniqueness so quickly. What once seemed utterly impossible is now old hat. How could that happen so quickly? How could we become so jaded? I don't ever want to forget the collective euphoria that occurred when we all learned that Barack Obama had been elected President of the United States of America. I don't want to forget how, for a moment, the city where I live, Oakland, California, was absolutely transformed. People were dancing and singing in the streets. People would stop their cars in the middle of the street to get out and hug someone on the sidewalk. It was absolutely amazing. I don't want to forget that during the inauguration, there was not a single crime committed in the entire city of Washington, D.C. That is a promise we have to hold on to. We cannot forget that. One of the advantages of having an African-American president, lest we forget, one who is running for re-election, is that it is now possible to call on the United Nations to monitor the polls. I remember when we used to jokingly say that we were going to ask the UN to monitor the elections, and we weren't serious about it. We were simply joking. But it is the case that United Nations affiliated election monitors from Europe and from Central Asia will be at polling places around the country and they will be looking for voter suppression activities by conservative groups. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is a United Nations partner on democratization and human rights projects, will deploy 44 observers. And an additional 80 to 90 members of parliament from over 30 countries will be here to monitor elections. This is what used to only happen in Africa, remember? The 2008 elections produced a world historical result. And as we prepare to go to the polls a few days from now, let us not forget how initially no one believed that it was possible to elect Barack Obama. As a matter of fact, the majority of black people were going with Hillary because they did not believe it was possible to elect a black person at this time. And then people said, oh, he's so young and he's so inexperienced, and his background is community organizing. And he was involved in the peace movement. But I think more importantly, for those of us who were excited about that election, what excited us most was that as a black person, it wasn't so much that he was black, or it wasn't only that he was black. It was that he deeply identified with the black struggle for freedom. It was a political identity with what Cedric Robinson and others have called the black radical tradition. That is to say, the tradition of sustained, unrelenting struggle for freedom, not only in the US, but all over the world. And for me, this was the real meaning of his blackness. It was about a collective, radical struggle for freedom, from Nat Turner and Harriet Tubman to W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells, to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Amilcar Cabral and Patrice Lumumba. And no one believed it was possible to elect him. But then there were those who refused to believe that it was impossible. And there were young people who were social media savvy, right? Who knew how to reach vast numbers of people instantaneously. And these young people had hope, and they refused to believe that anything was impossible. It was not even impossible to elect an African-American president of the United States of America. Now, the campaign that Obama ran was developed around categories that could appeal to any and everyone. And in a sense, they were large, capacious categories and concepts like hope. Everybody wants hope, right? Change. Everybody wants change. The future. And many people who were brought out by that campaign had never before been moved to get involved in electoral politics. But also, many people forgot the limits of electoral politics. They forgot that we were electing a president of the United States. The imperialist, militarist, racist, anti-union United States of America. But still, what was achieved was earth-shaking, and we should not forget that. What would the last 4 years have been like had John McCain been elected? I know many of us are disappointed, and it's okay to be disappointed, but let's put that disappointment into context. The economy crashed. Many people expected Obama to be the 21st century FDR, right? With new economic and social programs that would pull us out of the recession or depression. It really has been a depression. However, those who were simply waiting for Obama to emerge as the new FDR, had a very warped view of history. Was it really only FDR who gave us, on his own individual initiative, on his own accord, unemployment insurance, a Social Security? Was it? It was not. It was masses of people in the streets. And in many cases led by communists. In the 1930s, there were marches all over the country. There were hunger marches. There were unemployed councils that prevented evictions. If we believe that it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt who was responsible for unemployment insurance and Social Security, then we are absolutely wrong. And I say this to ask you to imagine what it might have been like had we taken to the streets the day after the inauguration, both to celebrate Obama's election and to pressure him to move on the issues we were all concerned about. Obama had said that he was going to shut down Guantanamo. Guantanamo is still functioning. We should have been out in the streets calling for the immediate closure of Guantanamo. The point that I'm making is that we can never expect to elect a president who will lead us to the promised land. As a matter of fact, not even a powerful mass leader can do that. We have to do it for ourselves. We have to do it for ourselves. And even Obama said during his last campaign, using the words of the wonderful feminist, black feminist poet June Jordan, he said, "We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the ones we have been waiting for." Now, some people think that the elections are all about who wins the debates. And I have to admit, the first debate was so totally boring. I mean, even Obama said that he was well rested by the third debate, especially since he slept through the first one. But we don't ask people to vote for Obama because he can be witty, although he can be. I like the fact that he said that when was Romney complaining about there being fewer ships than since the Civil War, and he said we also have fewer horses and bayonets too. And we can't assume that Obama is the person most likely to lead us down the path to freedom. We have to do that for ourselves. But I do think that Obama is the person who is most likely to be subject to pressure by mass movements. And 4 years ago, it seems as if we forgot about the relationship between electoral politics and mass movement politics and did not really make ourselves heard until last year this time during the Occupy era. But let me say I don't know how many of you were involved in Occupy events or went down to the site, but let me say that what happened this time last year would have been utterly inconceivable under a Republican president. People who gathered there would have been arrested immediately. Now, some were in some places, but for months, people engaged in this amazing experiment, which we cannot forget. You know, they say that in this country we have historical amnesia. Like, we forget so quickly. And if Occupy did nothing else, it created an arena for us to talk openly and critically about capitalism. As a matter of fact, probably for the first time since the 1930s. And so let's think about some of the issues that we have to force onto the national political agenda. First of all, we need an end to all of the union-busting strategies. And we have to, you know, these huge companies like Walmart should not be able to get away with its union-busting strategies all over the world in the way that it does. Private prisons, again, all over the world, are profitable precisely because they do not allow union organizing. And I want to inject something here that may sound a little radical, but that's why we're here this evening, isn't it? I think unions in this country, other countries as well, have to begin to think about organizing prisoners into labor unions so that prisoners cannot serve as union-busting labor. And as a matter of fact, prisoners have been trying to organize unions for at least 40 years. As a matter of fact, when I went to jail 40 years ago, during that time in Attica, they called for a labor union. They called for a labor union in California. There was a California prisoners' labor union, and they called for minimum wage. They also called for vacation pay. They did. I mean, just because you're in prison doesn't mean you shouldn't get a vacation from work. So let's think about that. Let's think about that. And I mention this because there was a time when the labor movement in this country was almost exclusively white. They refused to organize black workers, and they complained about black people being scabs. And of course, black people today are the backbone of the labor movement and are responsible for the radical character of the labor movement. Black people and Chicanos and Latinos, people of color in this country, are responsible for the power that still exists within the labor movement. Now, another issue which has to be placed on our agenda is that of undocumented workers. Because undocumented workers help the entire labor movement to inject militancy in our struggles and it was undocumented people who called for the celebration of May 1st, right? And who taught us that our struggles always have to be anti-racist and anti-xenophobic. And we also have to challenge anti-communism. Now, undocumented students represent the visible face of one of the most important struggles for democracy in this country. Vast numbers of students have come out as undocumented and have said to those who are officially recognized as citizens that no human being is illegal. No human being is illegal. And what they say is that citizenship is not a matter of papers. It is a matter of commitment to struggle together as a community to create a new world, a world that is free of racism, a world from which poverty has been expunged, a world without homophobia and transphobia, a world without the prison industrial complex, a world in which everyone learns how to respect the environment and all of the creatures, both human and non-human, who inhabit our worlds. True citizens are committed to the ongoing struggle for democracy and are dedicated to using their education to create a better world for us all. And so undocumented youth, it seems to me, represent one of the most important struggles for democracy today. And they say education, not deportation. And this is linked to the demand for education, not incarceration. And of course, not too long ago, the Obama administration took some small steps. The DREAM Act wasn't passed, but the Obama administration did take executive steps to guarantee that certain young undocumented students would be able to remain in the country. But this is a tiny step. Even if the DREAM Act had been passed, and it should have been passed a decade ago, even if it had been passed, it would have represented only a very small step toward immigrant rights. And of course, one of the problems with the DREAM Act that some people have pointed out is that not only education, but the military serves as a path towards citizenship. And it's true that if someone serves in the military, he or she does deserve to be a citizen. But we can't allow this provision of the DREAM Act to justify the imperialist incursions of the military, especially against the people of Afghanistan. The so-called war on terror has been extended from the Bush to the Obama administration, from Iraq to Afghanistan. And that is a very sad thing, because it has promoted the most deadly forms of Islamophobia. And it has fueled anti-immigrant racism in ways that we would never have thought imaginable. And Before I conclude, I want to follow that thread regarding Islamophobia to say a little bit about Palestine. But before I do that, let me just list, I think I have 2 more points. And these are just some of the things we should be thinking about, some of the issues we should be thinking about. What about women's reproductive rights? And can you believe these Republicans are saying the things that they say? Richard Murdoch from Indiana, who said that if a woman who is raped gets pregnant, then God intended it to happen? What is that about? And Romney, of course, even though he distanced himself from that remark, he did not pull the films in which he stars. He has endorsed Murdoch and is the main figure in his campaign films. Now, this is, of course, not the first time that a Republican candidate has said something so outrageous. You remember not long ago, Todd Akin, you remember when he said, if it is legitimate rape? Legitimate rape! Then he says, quote, the female body has ways to shut down the whole thing. Maybe he knows something from experience, but I've never, I have never encountered anything in science as outrageous as that. Well, anyway, 1973, Roe v. Wade. We thought that we had accomplished something then, although we knew then that Roe v. Wade did not necessarily guarantee poor women and Black women and Latina women the right to an abortion if they so chose, because the Supreme Court decision was based on privacy, based on the right to privacy. And the decision argued that the relationship between a woman and her doctor was a private relationship. What about all of those women who don't have doctors? So you see, all of these years, it has been largely middle-class women who have enjoyed the protection of Roe v. Wade, but Romney and his friends want to overturn Roe v. Wade. As a matter of fact, he said explicitly that he will appoint Supreme Court justices who will overturn Roe v. Wade. And the same politicians who are opposed to women's reproductive rights are generally also opposed to LGBT rights. Let's remember that Obama is the first sitting president to endorse gay marriage. It has never before happened in history. But strangely, there was nothing about this during any of the debates. Now, the last debate was supposed to be a discussion of foreign policy. Obama talked about foreign policy, but it was clear that Romney was totally out of his comfort zone. When moving away from domestic issues, he does not know what to say. And I think that reflects an inability, a larger inability, in the United States of America, of the population to see ourselves as people who live in the US but are an integral part of larger global issues. This is one of the main problems afflicting people in this country. Children learn geography as if the U.S. were the center of the world. And we still don't emphasize the need to learn other languages, which Claudia talked about. And as a matter of fact, I think everybody in this country should know how to speak Spanish. Everybody, absolutely everybody. Speaking about the world, as I was saying earlier, the wide-reaching influence of Islamophobia was possible precisely because we've been unable to imagine ourselves as world citizens, not simply as citizens of the nation. And this is why we get caught up in attacking immigrants without papers, because we don't even know what citizenship really means. And this deepening and expanding Islamophobia is in part responsible for our failure to understand the occupation of Palestine. And, you know, I always point out that I've been active in Palestine solidarity since I was an undergraduate. A long, long time, since the 1960s, where I learned Palestine solidarity at the Jewish university I attended, at Brandeis University, which was founded in 1948, the same year as the State of Israel was founded. And it was there that my Jewish friends and classmates taught me how to engage in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Now, whenever this issue is raised, it is under the guise of the Arab-Israeli conflict, which prevents people from recognizing that since 1948, Israel has confiscated land, natural resources, and the future of the Palestinians. The great Israeli historian Ilan Papp, who has an amazing book, I really recommend that you all read it. It is called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And he points out that half of the indigenous people living in Palestine were driven out beginning in 1948. Half of their villages and towns destroyed. And I'm quoting him, "It is indeed hard to understand why a crime that was perpetrated in modern times and at a juncture in history that called for foreign reporters and UN observers to be present should have been so totally ignored. And yet there is no denying," he writes, "that the ethnic cleansing of 1948 has been eradicated almost totally from the collective global memory and erased from the world's conscience." And it is interesting because we're used to using the term genocide, but it is not so much genocide, Papp argues, that motivated this process, but rather conscious strategies causing the population to flee. It was about deterritorialization. It was about creating a land without people for a people without land. And then he writes, "The expelled are erased from the country's official and popular history and excised from its collective memory." Does that sound familiar? Detroit. But also when you consider the basis of this country we inhabit today, the indigenous inhabitants were completely moved off of their land. They were totally deterritorialized and forced onto small reservations. Now, but let's talk just for a minute as I wind up about the struggles of Black people in this country. Suppose there had never been any international support for Black American struggles. Suppose we did not have people in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, supporting African Americans and their quest to be free. Where do you think we would be today? Where would we be? As a matter of fact, many of the cases that led to the development of what we call the civil rights movement were publicized initially not in the US press, but in the foreign press. And then if we think about our involvement in the anti-apartheid struggle, you remember how anti-apartheid activism in the US brought much needed support to the ANC and eventually helped to bring down apartheid? Why can we not see that Israeli apartheid is just as bad? And mind you, I am not talking about the people who live in Israel. I'm not talking about all of the people who live in Israel, all of the Jews who live in Israel, because many of them are involved in struggles against their own government, just as we here in this country have a history of challenging our government. But why can we not see that Israeli apartheid, and by the way, the United Nations has ruled that what is happening in Palestine is apartheid. Under the UN definitions of apartheid, it is called apartheid in Israel. It was once the case that the US government considered Nelson Mandela to be a terrorist. He was on the terrorist list. I mean, we forget, don't we? I mean, I remember when Amnesty International refused to support the demand for Nelson Mandela's freedom because he was a member of Umkhonto we Sizwe. And we also wonder why there is violence in that part of the world. We wonder why people engage in such desperate acts. And my sense is, I visited Palestine about a year ago, and I was totally devastated. And, you know, it brought back memories of growing up in Birmingham, Alabama. I saw the signs. In Palestine, they don't have signs that say Jewish and Arab, but they have signs that say authorized persons or authorized vehicles. There are highways in Palestine that are segregated. Only Jewish people who are settlers in occupied Palestine are able to drive on those highways. There are streets that Palestinians cannot walk down. They don't tell us that, do they? And as a matter of fact, not long ago, young Palestinians boarded segregated buses run by a company called Veolia that runs transportation services all over this country, including Super Shuttle. Anyway, I won't go on with that, but I will say Young Palestinians boarded those buses knowing full well they would be arrested because Palestinians aren't allowed to ride. And what do you think they call themselves? Palestinian Freedom Riders. They drew their inspiration from the history of our struggle for freedom. And I say this because I think it's about time that we stood up. You know, I think it's about time that we recognize that justice is indivisible. That we recognize that an injustice anywhere, as Dr. King said, is an injustice everywhere. And so I conclude by saying that we need peace and equality and justice and socialism for us all. Thank you.
My. Professor Angela Yvonne Davis, give her another big hand. Magnificent. Magnificent.